and I'll never work another night shift again. Working graveyard shift sucks for a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is the eeriness of it. I'm not a small guy, and I'm not easily spooked, but there's something about sitting alone in a patrol car with no human life in sight that gets under your skin in a way I never expected before I started this job. I work out of a heavily forested part of Wyoming, and most nights there's nothing to do but sit with the silence, watch the tree line, and wait for a call that usually never comes. It happened 2 nights after I got back from vacation. Jimmy, the officer who'd covered for me while I was out, told me he finally understood what I meant when I said the night shift was creepy. He looked a little worn down by it, honestly, like the silence had gotten to him the way it gets to everyone eventually. I laughed and told him I'd take the shift back for a while, that he'd get used to it. I had an idea. This was my only night shift scheduled that week. Why not make it a little more bearable for both of us? I invited Jimmy to ride along instead of sitting alone at the station under those fluorescent lights all night. He accepted almost before I'd finished asking. We parked in one of our usual spots along the tree line, put on a movie neither of us really watched, and cracked open a couple of beers we probably shouldn't have had on duty. We weren't expecting to move much for the rest of the night until my work phone rang. It was 3 a.m. Brian, the officer manning the station's phones, was on the other end, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Emergency call from the old Amick factory on McCaben Road. Guy broke in to steal equipment and somehow got himself stuck inside. No power out there, no working phones. The guy walked to the road just to flag someone down." Jimmy and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Brian asked us to go deal with it, arrest him or not. It was our call, and either way it beat writing another speeding ticket. We agreed, still chuckling, and headed out. The drive took about 10 minutes. A mech had shut down operations and moved out of the area a decade earlier, taking half the town's jobs with it. The factory had been empty ever since, mostly used now by local teenagers looking for somewhere to drink where no one would bother them. We climbed in through a broken window on the ground floor, flashlights up, calling out for whoever had gotten themselves stuck. No response came back, just our own voices echoing off the concrete. The hallway at the back of the factory split into 3 separate directions, each one leading toward a different wing of the building. We made the decision we split up, agreeing to keep our radios on and check in regularly. I was working my way through the 2nd floor when Jimmy's voice came through my radio, quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "Hey Tom, I see something. Down the hall from me, there's a hand sticking out of a doorway." "What do you mean a hand?" "There's a hand waggling its finger at me, like it's trying to get my attention." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. "Don't move," I told him. "Back away slowly. I'm coming to you." I started toward the stairs, telling myself the rational explanation: someone was stuck, someone was hurt, someone was motioning for help in the only way they could. That story held for about 30 seconds. Then my radio erupted with static and his voice, sharp with panic. "Tom, there's a face. Someone's looking at me." I broke into a full sprint. The access door to his section was locked from the inside. I slammed my shoulder into it again and again until the frame finally splintered enough for me to force it open, then took the stairs 2 at a time toward the 3rd floor, my hand already on my holster. That door was locked too, and this time it took everything I had: my shoulder, my boot, every ounce of adrenaline in my body before it finally caved enough for me to slip through into the hallway beyond. The hallway was almost entirely dark, except for one dimly lit room at the very end. A silhouette stood in the doorway of that room. It had to be Jimmy. I called out to him. Nothing at first. Then, faint laughter drifted down the hall toward me. The shape began to move, swaying slowly from side to side, almost like it was dancing to music only it could hear. I lowered my gun. I knew exactly what this was, or thought I did. Another prank, just like the one he'd already pulled on me earlier that same night, pretending to be attacked just to watch me panic. I was furious in a way that surprised even me. I screamed down the hallway that I was done, that he could bring the cruiser back to the station himself whenever he was finished messing around, and I stormed back out through the broken door without waiting for a response. Backup arrived a few minutes later, headlights sweeping across the gravel lot. I climbed into the back of their cruiser, ready to head home and put the whole night behind me. The officer driving glanced up at the building as he shifted into reverse. "Don't you want to wait for your partner? Looks like he's still up at that window." I followed his gaze. Sure enough, there was a faint light in one of the upper windows, a flashlight beam, and a silhouette standing behind it, watching us. I told them he could bring the car back on his own schedule. I was too angry to think twice about it, and we pulled away. Jimmy didn't show up for work the next day, or the day after that. His cruiser was still parked exactly where we'd left it outside the factory, untouched. When a couple of officers went out to check on it, they found it sitting in the same spot, doors locked, nothing disturbed. That's when they called me in on my day off. We searched the building floor by floor, room by room, until we reached that same third-floor hallway from 2 nights before. I climbed the stairs last and found one officer being sick in the corner of the stairwell. Another turned away entirely, unable to look. I pushed past both of them into the hallway. What was left of Jimmy was hanging from the doorway at the end of that hall. I'll just say that whoever, or whatever, had been in that room with him had taken its time and had arranged him there with a kind of deliberate care that made it worse, not better, like something meant to be found exactly the way it was found. Above him, rigged into the doorframe itself, was some kind of pulley system, built from things that were never meant to be used that way. I didn't get sick like the others did. I just stood there in that doorway, completely unable to process what I was looking at. All I could think about, standing there, was the light in that window hours earlier, after I'd already stormed out and driven away. If Jimmy had already been gone by then, already beyond helping who or what had been standing there watching us leave, we never found an answer. The case is still technically open, though nobody expects it to close. I put in for a transfer not long after, moved to a different district entirely, and I haven't taken a night shift since, not even for double pay. Some things aren't worth the money. I used to work warehouse night shifts through a temp agency. I don't anymore, and I haven't gone out after dark more than I absolutely have to in about 6 years, not since that night at Jefferson's. It was February, and where I live, winter doesn't do anything by halves once it finally arrives. The news that afternoon had been calling for the worst storm of the season, freezing rain turning to sleet, high winds, the whole miserable combination. I still had bills piling up that month, so when the agency called about a midnight shift opening, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Jefferson's wasn't the worst warehouse I'd worked, as far as these places went. It was a little more relaxed than some, and my friend Ace worked there too, which made the idea of another overnight shift a little easier to swallow. I was glad to see a familiar face when I clocked in that night, shaking snow off my jacket in the entryway. Ace was the kind of guy who couldn't stand to see anyone struggling, the sort of person who'd invite you out fishing just because he sensed you needed it, no explanation required. I'd looked up to him since I was a teenager, back when he was one of the only people who checked in on me after my dad passed. Our supervisor that night was a guy named Rob, the type who cleared his throat every other sentence in the most irritating way imaginable, like he couldn't get through a full thought without it. He split the crew into teams as soon as everyone had signed in. I ended up on the truck unloading team with Ace, along with 2 other guys I knew a little, Matt and Nathan, plus a forklift operator named Alan. We worked steadily for a few hours, unloading pallet after pallet of freight, the kind of repetitive labor that makes the night pass in a blur if you let it. Around the middle of the shift, we could hear the wind picking up outside, slamming against the metal walls of the building in heavy, rolling gusts that seemed to shake the whole structure. Ace pulled open one of the loading dock doors just to see how bad it had actually gotten out there. Snow swallowed everything beyond the doorway. We could barely make out the shape of the truck parked right in front of us, let alone anything further away. That's when Nathan spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Is that a person out there?" It took me a second to see what he meant. A shape, moving slowly through the storm, out in the middle of the open lot, far from any road or building that made sense. Nobody should have been out walking in weather like that, not unless something had gone seriously wrong. Ace, being Ace, couldn't just close the door and leave it alone. He started calling out, waving his arms, telling the figure to come inside out of the cold before it froze to death out there. Matt and Nathan joined in almost immediately, cupping their hands around their mouths to be heard over the wind. The shape stopped moving, seemed to notice us for the first time, and began shuffling slowly toward the open door. Rob came over to see what the commotion was about and sent me down to the break room to grab some hot coffee for whoever this stranger turned out to be. I only made it as far as the connecting hallway before I heard shouting behind me, followed almost immediately by something that didn't sound like shouting at all. By the time I turned back around, something had already come through that door low to the ground, moving with a speed that no person should have been capable of. It went for Matt and Nathan first, who scrambled backward, and then Rob threw a box at it, trying to slow it down. Ace tried to grab it from the side, the way he'd grab a stumbling drunk to help them stand, and was thrown off like he weighed nothing at all. I watched from that hallway as it turned its full attention on Ace. I'm not going to describe exactly what I saw next. I'll just say it happened fast, faster than I could process, and that I didn't do anything to stop it. I turned and ran for the break room instead, locked the door behind me, and dropped down against it, praying as hard as I've ever prayed that whatever was out there wouldn't come looking for me next. I heard everything I didn't want to hear through that door, screaming. More than one voice, the forklift crashing into something heavy. Then, after what felt like far too long, and also no time at all, nothing, a silence that somehow felt heavier and more wrong than all the noise that had come before it. I don't know how long I sat there with my back against that door, listening to my own heartbeat pound in my ears, half convinced that at any second I'd hear something scratching at the other side. The break room had no windows to the main floor, just a small, reinforced pane in the door itself, and I made myself wait as long as I could stand before I finally worked up the nerve to look through it. Eventually, the motion sensor lights throughout the warehouse began shutting off section by section from lack of movement, plunging one row after another into darkness, and I risked a lookout through that small window. Down at the far end of the building, past rows of empty racking, I could see it going through torn, open boxes, methodically, almost curiously, its hands dark and wet in a way I didn't want to think too hard about. I could see the forklift tipped on its side, one wheel still slowly spinning. I didn't let myself look for very long. I crawled along the floor to the bathroom at the back of the break room, locked myself inside, and didn't move again until the sun came up and I heard the next shift arriving outside, their voices carrying through the walls like something from another world entirely. When they finally found me, curled up on the bathroom floor, I could barely speak, let alone explain what had happened. I remember someone tried to open the door, and I nearly took a swing at them out of pure reflex before I understood who it was. It took a while before I could form full sentences again. Everyone I'd worked alongside that night, Ace, Rob, Matt, Nathan, and Alan, the forklift driver, were all dead. Every single one of them. No one could explain what had done it, or how, or why it had chosen that particular night to walk in out of a blizzard looking like it needed help. The police interviews are mostly a blur to me now, along with the days that followed. I remember being shown a lineup of photos and not recognizing a single face in it. I remember sitting in a hospital room being checked for injuries I didn't have, at least not the physical kind. Police searched for weeks and came up with nothing solid, no fingerprints that matched anyone in their system, no trace of where the man had come from or where he'd gone after. The man from the storm, if that's even what he was never identified, and as far as I know, he was never seen again by anyone who lived to report it. I spent a few months after that not working at all. Therapy helped some. Time helped a little more. Eventually, the bills caught up with me again the way they always do, and I went back to temp work because I didn't have the credentials for much else and couldn't afford to go back to school for something different. I still think about Ace sometimes, more than I'd like to admit about how it was exactly. Painfully like him to try and help a stranger in from the cold without a second thought, and how I froze instead of doing anything to help him back. I wonder sometimes if I could have done something differently, if rushing in instead of running might have changed anything at all, or if it just would have meant one more body on that floor. I don't know. I just know I don't take night shifts anymore, no matter what they're paying, and I don't go outside after dark if there's any way around it. I'll never forget why I stopped closing alone. I worked at a small restaurant, the kind of place with maybe 15 tables and a short bar along one wall. My manager, Olivia, and I usually closed together on weeknights. Everyone else finished their side work and headed home earlier, leaving just the two of us to sweep, mop, and lock everything down before we could leave. We had a routine by that point, worn smooth from repetition. I'd sweep the dining room, wipe down the tables, get the mop bucket filling up while I finished the rest. Olivia would usually be parked at the computer near the server station, finishing up paperwork for the night. We spent most of those closing shifts giving each other a hard time. I'd hide things in her apron pockets or ask her deliberately stupid questions just to watch her get annoyed, and she'd threaten to fire me at least twice a week without ever meaning it. It was never anything serious between us. That was just how we passed the slow hours. That particular night felt different almost from the start, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. While I was out sweeping near the front windows, I noticed a car sitting in the far corner of the lot. Engine off, no one getting out, no one on their phone that I could see, just parked there, facing the restaurant. I mentioned it to Olivia. She barely glanced up from her screen, finished the mopping. I kept glancing back at the windows anyway, unable to shake the feeling that something about it was wrong. About an hour later, the car was still sitting in exactly the same spot. Then, finally, someone stepped out and started walking toward the entrance. I opened the door before he could knock. A man in his mid-30s stood on the other side, disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, giving me a smile that immediately put every instinct I had on edge. "What time do you guys close?" he asked. I told him. He asked for my number before I'd even finished answering. I said I couldn't give that out while I was on the clock, keeping my voice as polite and professional as I could manage. His smile faltered, just slightly, just for a second, before Olivia appeared beside me at the door. "He's still working," she said flatly, one hand finding my shoulder as she steered us both back inside. "Have a good night." Once the door was shut and locked behind him, I told her again, more insistent this time. That guy had been sitting out there in his car for a full hour before he ever worked up the nerve to come to the door. She apologized, admitting quietly that she hadn't taken me seriously at first, because I joke around too much during closing shifts to always be believed. Fair enough. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have believed me either most nights. We went back to finishing up, still a little tense with each other, when the unmistakable sound of shattering glass cut through the empty dining room. We both froze completely still. "If this is one of your jokes," she started, already backing toward me. "It's not," I said, and I meant it. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. We moved toward the sound together, slowly, neither of us wanting to be the one out front. There were no broken windows anywhere we could see, no obvious sign of anything out of place. I called out into the dining room. No response, no footsteps, no sound at all beyond our own breathing. Then the power went out, all at once, plunging the entire restaurant into a darkness so complete it felt physical. Olivia's hand found mine in the pitch black, without either of us saying a word. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then I felt it, that same certainty settling over both of us at once. We weren't alone in that dining room anymore, and whatever else was in there with us wasn't moving toward the door, it was moving toward us. "We run for the cars on 3, I whispered, barely audible even to myself. "Okay," she whispered back, her grip tightening around my hand. 1, 2, 3, she said, cutting me off, and bolted for the front door before I'd even finished counting. I chased after her through the darkness, and that's when I saw him over my shoulder, the man from earlier, already closing the distance between us far faster than he should have been able to, and he wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't make it more than a few steps before his hand closed around my shoulder and yanked me backward, hard enough that I nearly went down onto the pavement. I remember the sudden, sharp pain of it, my feet scrambling for grip, and I remember thinking, with a strange kind of clarity that didn't feel like my own thoughts at all, that this was really happening, that this was it, that I'd run out of time to do anything about it. What happened over the next few minutes is mostly a blur to me now, pieced together afterward from adrenaline and fragments that don't quite connect to each other. I know he had a knife. I remember the cold of it, more than the pain, pressed low against my side. I know he pressed it there and told Olivia, in a voice I still hear sometimes in the moments right before I fall asleep, not to come any closer, that he'd finish it if she did. She didn't listen to him. I still don't fully understand, even now, years later, how a woman half his size managed to get him off of me. But somehow, she did. I remember screaming, though I couldn't tell you whose voice it was. I remember the sudden release of pressure against my side, and then her hands were on me, pulling me by the arm toward her car, half dragging me across the gravel because my legs weren't working the way they were supposed to. I remember the gas station a few blocks away where she finally stopped the car, hands shaking too badly to hold the phone steady while she called the police, glancing back over her shoulder every few seconds like she expected him to be standing right behind us. I remember sitting in the back of an ambulance afterward, wrapped in a blanket someone had handed me, the paramedics asking me questions I could barely process, her hand still holding mine the entire time like she was afraid that if she let go, something else would happen. The police searched for him for weeks. They circulated a description based on what little I could tell them, checked it against every record they had access to, and never got a single match. No name, no priors, no explanation for who he was or why he'd chosen our restaurant, our night. The two of us specifically, out of everyone in town. Just a warning in the end to be more careful when we closed up at night. And a case number that I'm told is still technically open, filed away somewhere in a drawer that nobody expects to open again. I still work at that restaurant. Olivia still works there too, and if anything, we're closer now than we ever were before that night, though neither of us talks about it much. But we don't close alone anymore, not without at least one more person on shift with us, no matter how slow or dead the night looks going in. Management complained about the extra scheduled hours for a while, and we didn't care. If something feels wrong while you're closing up somewhere alone, trust it completely, even if it seems ridiculous, even if the person standing next to you rolls their eyes at you for saying it out loud. It might be the only warning you're going to get, and you might not get a second one.